What if I told you that America's closest ally, the country we share the longest undefended border in human history with, just looked the President of the United States dead in the eye and said no? That's exactly what happened, and the fallout could change everything about how much you pay for gas, groceries, and the car sitting in your driveway right now. This is not speculation. This is not opinion. This is breaking news that every single American needs to understand because it hits your wallet directly. So if you care about your money, your family's cost of living, and the future of the American economy, you need to stay right here because I am going to break this entire story down with every single detail, every source, and every consequence that the mainstream media is not putting together for you in one place. Let's get into it. On January 16th, 2026, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney did something no Canadian leader has done in nearly a decade. He flew to Beijing, China, sat down with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and announced what the Canadian government officially called a new strategic partnership between Canada and the People's Republic of China. This was confirmed directly by the Prime Minister's office in an official press release on the Government of Canada website. The deal was massive. According to CNBC and the official Canadian government backgrounder, China agreed to slash its tariffs on Canadian canola seed from a punishing 85% down to approximately 15% by March 1st, 2026. To put that in perspective, canola is a $4 billion annual export market for Canada, and those tariffs had essentially strangled the trade between the two countries. But it did not stop there. China also agreed to remove what they call anti-discrimination tariffs on Canadian canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas from March 1st through at least the end of 2026. According to the Prime Minister's office, this was expected to unlock nearly $3 billion in export orders for Canadian farmers and seafood harvesters. And here is where it gets really interesting for Americans. In exchange for all of that, Canada agreed to let Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian market. Specifically, according to Electrek and multiple other outlets, Canada would allow an annual quota of 49,000 Chinese EVs at a tariff rate of just 6.1%. Remember, Canada had previously slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs back in October 2024, mirroring exactly what the United States had done. So this was a complete reversal. Canada was breaking ranks with America on one of the biggest trade issues of our time. Now, let me be very clear about the timeline here, because this matters. On January 16th, the day the deal was announced, President Trump was actually asked about it by reporters at the White House. And what he said shocked a lot of people. According to ABC News, Trump told reporters, quote, "That is what he should be doing. It is a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that," end quote. The President of the United States essentially gave his blessing. But then something changed. Just 4 days later, on January 20th, Prime Minister Carney stepped onto the stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and delivered a speech that would set off a geopolitical firestorm. According to Al Jazeera, The Washington Post, and CNN, Carney told the assembled world leaders that the global order was experiencing a rupture, not a transition. He said that middle powers must act together because, and these are the words that echoed around the world, if we are not at the table, we are on the menu. He warned about economic coercion by great powers. He never mentioned Trump by name, but according to every major outlet that covered the speech, it was widely understood as a direct rebuke of the Trump administration's economic policies. The crowd in Davos gave him a standing ovation, and that, my friends, is when things went sideways. According to NPR, Trump responded from Davos by saying, "Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements." Then Trump revoked Carney's invitation to join what the president calls his Board of Peace, a group he was forming to resolve global conflicts. And then on Saturday, January 24th, President Trump took to Truth Social and dropped the hammer. According to CNN, CNBC, NPR, The Washington Post, Al Jazeera, and literally every major news organization on the planet, Trump wrote, "If Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken. If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the USA. Let that sink in. 100% tariffs on everything from Canada. And notice he called the Prime Minister of Canada Governor Carney, the same dismissive nickname he used for former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, playing off his repeated suggestion that Canada should become the 51st state. Now, here is why every American watching this needs to pay very close attention. Canada is not just any trading partner. According to NPR and S&P Global, Canada is the #1 export destination for 36 U.S. states. Nearly 3.6 billion Canadian dollars worth of goods and services cross our shared border every single day. About 60% of all U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada. 85% of U.S. electricity imports come from Canada. Canada is our largest foreign supplier of steel, aluminum, and uranium. According to S&P Global, Canada supplies about 2/3 of all primary aluminum consumed by the United States. So when the president threatens 100% tariffs on Canadian goods, he is not just punishing Canada, he is potentially driving up the cost of energy, manufacturing materials, and everyday goods for 330 million Americans. The aluminum market reacted almost immediately. According to S&P Global, the Midwest aluminum premium had already broken the $1 per pound barrier right around this time, and analysts warned that escalating tariffs would drive prices even higher. Now, here is where the story takes another dramatic turn that most people missed. Despite Trump's explosive threat, Canada did not back down. Not really. On Sunday, January 26th, Prime Minister Carney held a press conference. According to CNBC, CBC News, PBS, and Fox News, Carney said that Canada has no intention of pursuing a free trade agreement with China. He clarified that what Canada had done was simply to rectify some issues that developed in the last couple of years. He pointed out that under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, also known as USMCA, there are commitments not to pursue free trade agreements with non-market economies without prior notification, and he said Canada respects those commitments. But here is the critical detail that almost everyone overlooked. Carney did not cancel the deal. The preliminary agreement on canola, on agricultural products, on allowing 49,000 Chinese EVs into Canada at a 6.1% tariff, all of that stayed in place. According to the Globe and Mail, Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc had a lengthy conversation with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer to reassure Washington that Canada was not pursuing a comprehensive free trade agreement with Beijing. But the existing deal, the one that had already been announced, remained intact. Canada essentially said, "We hear your threat. We are not going further, but we are not walking back what we already agreed to." That is the definition of standing your ground. And the markets noticed. According to the Council on Foreign Relations senior fellow Inu Manak, who was quoted by CNN, it sounded like Trump was lashing out at Carney for stealing the limelight at Davos, and that he did not get his tariffs over Greenland, so now he was searching for another target to threaten. CNN also reported that investors had started using a term you might find interesting. They were calling situations like this TACO, which stands for Trump always chickens out, referring to the pattern of dramatic tariff threats that do not ultimately materialize. And if you are watching this right now and you want to understand how these trade wars affect your daily life, your gas prices, your grocery bills, and your investments, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is far from over, and I'm going to keep you updated on every single development. Now, let me take you deeper into why this matters so much for the American economy specifically. Before this China deal even happened, Trump had already been escalating tariffs on Canada throughout 2025. According to the Tax Foundation's comprehensive tariff tracker, in August 2025, Trump raised the tariff on Canadian goods to 35%. And according to NPR, in the fall of 2025, the Canadian province of Ontario aired an anti-tariff advertisement in the United States that used the words of former President Ronald Reagan to criticize tariffs. Trump was so furious about it that he ended trade talks with Canada and pledged to increase tariffs by an extra 10%, although he ultimately did not follow through on that particular threat. But the damage to the relationship was already done. Canada, which had been America's closest economic partner for generations, was actively looking for alternatives. Carney had traveled to India, to the EU, to Qatar, to China, building new trade partnerships precisely because the U.S. was becoming what Canadian officials described as an unreliable partner. And that brings us to what may be the most consequential development in this entire saga, one that fundamentally changed the game. On February 20th, 2026, the United States Supreme Court, in a landmark 6-3 decision, ruled that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEEPA, does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. According to SCOTUS blog, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion, joined by Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Gorsuch, Barrett, and Jackson. The court found that the two words regulate and importation in IEEPA could not bear the weight of authorizing the president to unilaterally impose tariffs on imports from any country of any product at any rate for any amount of time. This was seismic. According to the Penn-Wharton budget model, IEEPA tariffs had generated approximately $175 billion in revenue. The ruling meant that potentially all of that money would need to be refunded to importers. According to Holland and Knight and other legal analysis firms, more than 1,000 businesses had already filed for refunds before the ruling even came down, and that number was expected to grow dramatically. Within hours of the Supreme Court decision, Trump signed a proclamation imposing a new 10% global tariff under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, effective February 24th. The very next day, he announced he would raise it to 15%, which is the maximum allowed under that law. But here's the thing. According to the Yale Budget Lab, these replacement tariffs represented roughly half of what the IEEPA tariffs had been collecting. For Canada specifically, goods that qualified under USMCA remained exempt, and the overall tariff burden was significantly reduced from the 35% that had been in place. So when you zoom out and look at the full picture, what actually happened? Canada struck a deal with China. Trump threatened 100% tariffs. Canada stood its ground on the existing agreement while diplomatically assuring Washington it was not pursuing anything further. Then the Supreme Court knocked out the very legal foundation Trump had been using for his most aggressive tariffs. The replacement tariffs were significantly lower, and Canada's trade diversification strategy, the one Carney had been building for months, looked more vindicated than ever. According to The Hub, a Canadian policy outlet that tracked Carney's 26 international trips in his first year in office, Canada had not only secured the China deal, but had also launched trade partnerships with India, Indonesia, the European Union, and several other nations. Carney had signed a $2.6 billion uranium supply deal with India. He had negotiated a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Indonesia. He was actively building exactly the kind of diversified portfolio he had described in Davos. Now, what does all of this mean for you, the American consumer, the American worker, the American investor? First, energy prices. Canada supplies 60% of our crude oil imports and 85% of our electricity imports. Any tariff escalation against Canada gets passed directly to American consumers at the gas pump and on their utility bills. According to the Yale Budget Lab, the tariffs as of February 20th, 2026, represented the equivalent of a 6.7 percentage point increase in the average effective tariff rate, and the burden falls hardest on lower income households who spend a larger fraction of their income on goods that get more expensive under tariffs. Second, manufacturing costs. American manufacturers depend on Canadian steel, aluminum, lumber, and other raw materials. According to the Aluminum Association, Canada supplies about 2/3 of all primary aluminum consumed in the United States. Tariffs on these materials mean higher costs for everything from cars to construction to consumer electronics. Third, and this is the one nobody is talking about enough, the USMCA review. According to the Globe and Mail and multiple other sources, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement is scheduled for a mandatory review in 2026. This is the foundational trade agreement that governs the most important trading relationship in the world, and it is coming up for review at a time when the relationship between the U.S. and Canada is at its lowest point in modern history. If that review goes badly, if the agreement is weakened or terminated, the economic consequences for American businesses, American workers, and American consumers would be enormous. Now, I want to address something that I know a lot of you are thinking. Some of you are saying, good, we should be tough on trade. We should not let Canada play both sides. And I hear you. There is absolutely a legitimate conversation to be had about trade fairness, about making sure American workers are not getting the short end of the deal. But here is what the data actually shows. According to NPR, nearly 3.6 billion Canadian dollars worth of goods and services cross the US-Canada border every single day. That is not Canada taking advantage of us. That is the most successful two-way trading relationship on earth. When we put tariffs on Canadian goods, we are not just hurting Canada. We are hurting the 36 US states for which Canada is the top export destination. We are hurting American farmers who export billions in agricultural products north. We are hurting American energy consumers who depend on Canadian oil and electricity. The question is not whether we should have trade agreements. The question is whether threatening our closest ally with 100% tariffs, calling their leader governor as an insult, and pushing them into the arms of China is actually making America stronger or making America more isolated. And based on what has happened over the last 2 months, with the Supreme Court striking down IEEPA tariffs, with Canada successfully diversifying its trade relationships, and with the USMCA review looming, the evidence suggests that this approach may be backfiring in ways that will take years to fully understand. If you found this breakdown valuable, if you appreciate someone taking the time to go through every source, every detail, every economic consequence, instead of just giving you sound bites and hot takes, then I need your help. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to understand what is happening, and subscribe to this channel because I promise you, the trade story of 2026 is just getting started, and you do not want to miss what comes next. The USMCA review, the Supreme Court refund battle, and Canada's continued pivot toward Asia are all developing stories that will directly impact your wallet, your job, and your future. I will be right here breaking it all down. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.